Jake Morrison wiped the grease from his hands and looked at the old clock on the workshop wall. 2 in the morning again. He had been working late shifts at Stellar Repairs for 3 years now, and the routine never got easier. The small garage floated on the edge of Station Eco 7, squeezed between the massive corporate hangars that serviced the big shipping companies. Most nights were quiet, with maybe 1 or 2 small jobs coming through the emergency channel. Pete Collins owned the garage and treated Jake well enough. The old man had given him a job when nobody else would hire a human mechanic. Most aliens thought humans were too simple to understand advanced technology. They preferred their own kind or the big corporate repair chains. Stellar Repairs survived on emergency calls and the occasional desperate captain who needed quick fixes at low prices. Jake was cleaning his tools when the emergency beacon started flashing red. The harsh sound filled the small workshop and made him jump. Emergency calls meant real trouble somewhere in the asteroid fields around the station. Ships broke down out there all the time, but most had fancy rescue services. Only the desperate or the poor called little places like Stellar Repairs. The communication panel crackled to life. The voice was strange and musical, speaking in a language Jake did not recognize. The translation system kicked in after a few seconds. Emergency assistance required, life support failing. Multiple juveniles aboard, coordinates attached. Please respond immediately. Jake grabbed his repair kit and headed for his shuttle. Pete was asleep in his quarters and Jake did not want to wake him. The old man worried too much about dangerous rescue calls. Jake had done plenty of emergency repairs and knew how to handle himself in space. He fired up the shuttle engines and punched in the coordinates from the distress call. The asteroid field stretched out before him like a maze of floating rocks. Some were small as houses, while others were big as cities. Jake had learned to navigate these fields during his first year on the station. The rocks moved in slow patterns that could crush a small ship if you were not careful. His shuttle was built for this kind of work, small and tough with good shields and plenty of tools. The coordinates led him deep into the field where the asteroids were bigger and darker. Jake almost missed the ship at first because it was so huge. When he finally saw it, he could not believe his eyes. The vessel was enormous, easily the size of a small moon. Its surface was not made of metal like human ships, but looked more like living tissue. Soft curves flowed across its hull, and faint lights pulsed under the surface, like a heartbeat. Jake had seen Zephyrian ships before, but never one this big. The aliens were known for their biotechnology, and their ships looked more grown than built. This one was clearly a deep space vessel, probably a family transport or maybe a small city ship. But it was dead in space. No movement and no lights except for the faint emergency beacon. He brought his shuttle alongside the massive hull and looked for a docking port. The ship was so big that it took him 10 minutes just to find an airlock. When he finally docked, Jake could feel the cold seeping through the connection. The ship's heating systems were failing and whoever was inside would not last much longer. Jake put on his emergency suit and grabbed his toolkit. The airlock opened with a soft hiss and he stepped inside. The corridor was huge, built for beings much larger than humans. The walls curved like the inside of a shell and glowed with dim bioluminescent patterns. Jake had never been inside a Zephyrian ship before, and everything felt alien and strange. He followed the corridor toward the emergency beacon signal. The ship was cold and getting colder. Jake could see his breath in the air, and the bioluminescent patterns were fading as the ship's systems shut down. He moved as fast as he could, following the signal deeper into the vessel. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that looked like a living room designed for giants. Soft furniture made of some kind of organic material filled the space. And there, in the center of the room, Jake saw them. The adult Zephyrian was massive, easily 12 feet tall, with an iridescent carapace that shifted colors in the dim light. Her body was insect-like but graceful, with 4 arms and legs that ended in delicate manipulator appendages. Her head was elongated with large compound eyes that reflected the fading light patterns on the walls. But it was not her size that stopped Jake in his tracks. 6 smaller Zephyrians huddled around her, clearly her young ones. They were about the size of human children, but with the same insect-like features as their mother. They pressed close to her for warmth, and Jake could see they were shivering. The adult female noticed him first and made a series of clicking sounds that the ship's translation system picked up. "You came," the translator said in a voice full of relief. "I am Kethra. These are my younglings. Our ship has failed and we cannot repair it. The cold is taking them." Jake looked at the family and felt something twist in his chest. The young ones were suffering and their mother was desperate. He had seen that look before in the eyes of human parents when their children were in danger. It was the same across all species. "I am Jake," he said, hoping the translator would work both ways. "I am here to help. Show me your engine room." Kethra's eyes widened. "You would help us, but you are so small. Our technology is not made for your kind." Jake smiled and hefted his toolkit. "Let me worry about that. Just show me what is broken." The Zephyrian matriarch stood up to her full height and gestured for Jake to follow her. Her younglings stayed close to her side as they moved through the failing ship. Jake noticed that the bioluminescent patterns were almost gone now and the air was getting thinner. Whatever was wrong with this ship, it was getting worse fast. They walked for what felt like miles, through corridors that curved and branched like the inside of a living creature. Finally, they reached a chamber that had to be the engine room. Jake stopped and stared. The technology before him was unlike anything he had ever seen. Instead of mechanical parts, everything looked grown or evolved. Organic conduits pulsed with energy while crystalline structures hummed with power. And right in the center, something was very wrong. "The quantum flow regulators have failed," Kethra explained. "The bio-neural networks cannot compensate. Our engineers said it would take weeks to grow new components." Jake walked around the alien machinery and tried to understand what he was seeing. The systems were incredibly advanced, but he could see the problem. The organic components had become sick or damaged and were not carrying power properly. The whole system was shutting down as the damaged parts infected the healthy ones. "Weeks?" Jake said, looking at the shivering younglings. "You do not have weeks. You have maybe hours." Kethra's bioluminescent patterns flickered with what Jake guessed was sadness. "I know. That is why I sent the emergency call. I hope someone would at least rescue my young ones." Jake set down his toolkit and rolled up his sleeves. "Well, I am not much good at rescue operations, but I am pretty good at fixing things that are broken." He began pulling tools from his kit, simple human instruments that looked primitive compared to the alien technology around them. Kethra watched with growing amazement as Jake approached her ship's failing systems with nothing but determination and a toolbox full of spare parts. Jake stared at the alien machinery for a long moment, trying to understand what he was looking at. The Zephyrian technology was beautiful in a strange way. Everything flowed together like parts of a living creature. The organic conduits pulsed weakly, carrying less and less power as the damaged sections spread their sickness through the system. It was like watching a body slowly die from infection. Kethra stood behind him with her younglings pressed close to her legs. The little ones were shivering more now, and their own bioluminescent patterns were fading. Jake could see the desperation in their mother's compound eyes. She had called for help knowing that most species could not repair Zephyrian biotechnology. But she had tried anyway because her children were dying. "Your quantum flow regulators," Jake said, pointing at the crystalline structures that seemed to be the heart of the problem. "They are like the heart of your ship, right? They pump energy through these organic tubes to all the other systems." Kethra made clicking sounds that translated as surprise. "You understand our technology? But humans are not supposed to comprehend biomechanical integration at this level." Jake laughed and pulled out a plasma torch from his toolkit. "I do not understand it at all, but I understand what broken looks like. And I understand that your kids are going to freeze if we do not fix this fast." He began examining the failed regulators more closely. The crystalline structures were cracked and several of the organic conduits leading away from them had turned black. Whatever had damaged the system had created a cascade failure that was spreading through the ship like a disease. The biotechnology was trying to heal itself, but the damage was too severe. "The problem is that your ship is too smart," Jake said, running his hands along the blackened conduits. "It keeps trying to route power through the damaged sections because that is how it was designed to work. But the damage is spreading faster than the healing." Jake pulled out a length of standard plasma conduit from his kit. It was simple human technology, nothing more than a metal tube designed to carry energy from one place to another. Compared to the elegant Zephyrian bioconduits, it looked crude and primitive. "What are you doing?" Kethra asked as Jake began, cutting through one of the organic tubes with his plasma torch. "I am going to bypass your damaged sections with some basic human plumbing," Jake said. "Your ship is trying to heal the sick parts, but we do not have time for that. So we are going to give the energy a different path to take." Kethra's bioluminescent patterns flickered in what Jake was learning to recognize as alarm. "But human technology is not compatible with our biosystems. The integration protocols alone would take days to establish." Jake grinned and started connecting his plasma conduit to the healthy sections of the alien ship. "Who said anything about integration? I am just going to strap this stuff on the outside and hope it works." What followed was the strangest repair job Jake had ever attempted. He ran plasma conduits along the walls of the engine room, connecting them to the Zephyrian systems with whatever adapters he could jury-rig. When he ran out of proper connectors, he used cable ties and duct tape. When the biotechnology rejected his crude connections, he wrapped everything in insulation and forced the systems to work together. The younglings began to warm up as Jake rerouted power around the damaged sections. Their bioluminescent patterns grew brighter, and they started making small chirping sounds that the translator said were expressions of joy. Kethra watched in growing amazement as her ship came back to life under the ministrations of this small human with his box of primitive tools. "Your methods are completely against all known engineering principles," she said as Jake spliced a human power regulator into her ship's main distribution network. "This should not work." "Yeah, well, sometimes the universe has a sense of humor," Jake replied, testing the power flow through his improvised repairs. "The important thing is that it does work. Your ship does not care if the repairs are pretty as long as they get the job done." Jake worked for hours, crawling through maintenance tunnels and access panels that were barely big enough for his human frame. The Zephyrian ship had been designed for much larger beings, and Jake often had to squeeze through spaces that would have been impossible for the ship's original builders. But his small size became an advantage as he reached damaged systems that the Zephyrians could not access. The younglings began following him around as he worked, chattering in their musical language and offering helpful suggestions that the translator turned into things like, "Why not use the tertiary biogel manifolds?" Jake would smile and ruffle their strange alien hair, then continue with his human approach of bypassing anything that looked complicated. As the hours passed, Jake found himself running low on supplies. He had used most of his spare conduits and adapters, and several of his tools were starting to wear out from the strain. But the ship was responding to his repairs. Life support was stabilizing, the heating systems were warming the corridors, and the bioluminescent patterns were growing brighter throughout the vessel. "I need to get some supplies from my shuttle," Jake told Kethra as he surveyed his work. "The main power coupling is still unstable, and I want to reinforce some of these connections before we call it finished." Kethra accompanied him back to the docking port, her younglings trailing behind them like a parade. Jake could see that the matriarch was still struggling to understand what had happened. Her advanced biotechnology had been saved by crude human engineering that should not have worked. "In 3 years of emergency repairs, I have never seen anything like this," Jake said as they walked through corridors that were now warm and brightly lit. "Your ship is amazing. It is like a living creature that happens to fly through space. And your repair methods are unlike anything in our technical databases," Kethra replied. "Our engineers would have grown new biocomponents and integrated them properly with the existing systems. It would have taken weeks, but the result would have been elegant and permanent. Jake nodded as he gathered more supplies from his shuttle. Sometimes elegant is not what you need. Sometimes you just need something that works right now. Your kids were not going to wait weeks for an elegant solution. When he returned to the engine room, Jake spent another 6 hours reinforcing his repairs and adding backup systems. He ran secondary power lines through different routes, installed manual override switches that would allow the crew to control systems even if the biotechnology failed again, and generally turned the elegant Zephyrian engineering into something that looked like it had been assembled by a very determined and slightly crazy human mechanic. By the time Jake finished, the ship was running better than it had when he first arrived. The biotechnology was healing around his crude repairs, incorporating them into the ship's systems in ways that fascinated him. The organic components seemed to recognize that the human additions were helping and began growing new connections to integrate with them. "This is impossible," Kethra said, studying her ship's diagnostic readings. "The bio-neural networks are showing integration patterns that should not exist. Your primitive repairs are somehow becoming part of our advanced systems." Jake packed up his tools and smiled at the younglings who had been his helpers throughout the long repair session. Maybe that is the point. Maybe advanced does not always mean better. Maybe sometimes you just need someone willing to try something different. The matriarch studied Jake with her compound eyes, seeing him in a completely new light. This small human had done something her own engineers had declared impossible. He had saved her family with nothing but determination and a willingness to ignore the rules about what should and should not work. "I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid," Kethra said formally. "You have given me back my younglings and shown me that there are solutions beyond our understanding." Jake was about to reply that no payment was necessary when Kethra pressed a small crystalline device into his hands. It was warm to the touch and pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns he had seen throughout the ship. "This is a family beacon," she explained. "If you ever need anything at all, activate this device and I will come. It is a promise that spans the stars." Jake returned to Stellar Repairs feeling good about the night's work. He had saved a family and earned enough credits to keep the garage running for another month. Pete Collins was already awake and making coffee when Jake walked through the door. The old man looked at the repair report Jake handed him and whistled softly. "A Zephyrian deep space transport? Jake, those things are worth more than our entire station. What was one doing broken down in the asteroid field?" Jake shrugged and poured himself a cup of coffee. Family was traveling somewhere and their ship broke down, life support was failing, and they had kids aboard. "I just did what anyone would do." Pete shook his head and filed the report. Most mechanics would have called it in to the big corporate repair services. "Zephyrian technology is way above our pay grade." "You sure you fixed it properly?" "It was working when I left," Jake said. "Sometimes the simple solutions are the best ones." 3 days later, Jake found out just how right he was. The first ship arrived on Tuesday morning. It was another Zephyrian vessel, smaller than the transport he had repaired but still impressive. The captain was a merchant named Velthun who spoke perfect standard language. "I am looking for the human mechanic Jake Morrison," Velthun announced when he entered the garage. "I have heard remarkable things about your repair abilities." Jake looked up from the cargo hauler he was working on. "Just standard emergency repairs. What can I do for you?" Velthun's bioluminescent patterns shifted to what Jake was learning meant excitement. "My ship's bio-neural networks have been experiencing integration difficulties. 3 different corporate repair services have told me the problem cannot be solved without growing entirely new components. But I have heard that you approach such problems differently." Jake spent the afternoon working on Velthun's ship. The problem was similar to what he had encountered on Kethra's transport, but less severe. The biotechnology was rejecting some recent upgrades and causing system conflicts. Jake solved it by installing simple bypass circuits that allowed the conflicting systems to ignore each other. "Remarkable," Velthun said as his ship's system stabilized. "The corporate engineers wanted to replace half my ship. You have solved the problem with a few simple additions. Zephyr Merchant paid Jake 10 times the standard rate and left, promising to recommend his services to other ship captains. Pete watched the alien ship depart and turned to Jake with a puzzled expression. How did he know about your repair work? Zephyrians do not usually talk to humans about technical matters. Jake was wondering the same thing. Word of his emergency. Repairs seemed to be spreading through the alien community faster than should have been possible. But he did not have long to think about it because 2 more ships arrived that afternoon. The first was a Karathi heavy freighter with engine problems. The second was a passenger liner from the Helix Confederation. Both captains specifically requested Jake, and both paid far more than the repairs should have cost. By the end of the week, Stellar Repairs had more work scheduled than they had seen in the previous 6 months. This is getting strange, Pete said as he looked at their booking schedule. Half of these ships could afford the best repair services in the sector. Why are they coming to us? Jake was starting to wonder the same thing. The repair jobs kept coming and they were getting more interesting. Ships with problems that the big corporate services had declared unfixable were arriving at their small garage. Jake found solutions for all of them using his simple approach of bypassing complicated systems with basic alternatives. A week later, the gifts started arriving. The first package contained a set of tools unlike anything Jake had ever seen. They were made from some kind of adaptive metal that changed shape based on what he was trying to repair. The note with them was written in flowing Zephyrian script that translated to, "For the one who thinks beyond limits." More packages followed over the next few days. Rare metals that were worth a fortune on the open market. Advanced diagnostic equipment that could analyze any ship system. A complete set of universal adapters that could connect human technology to any alien system. Each gift came with a note but no indication of who was sending them. Pete was getting nervous about the expensive packages. Jake, this stuff is worth more than our garage. Someone is spending serious money on you. I want to know why. The mystery deepened when Jake discovered that their rent had been paid in advance for the next 5 years. The station administrator was as confused as anyone. The payment had come through a chain of corporate accounts that were so complex nobody could trace them back to the source. Whoever is doing this has serious financial resources, the administrator explained. The kind of money that moves through galactic banking networks without leaving easy trails. Jake was starting to feel uncomfortable about the attention. He appreciated the gifts and the business, but he did not understand what he had done to deserve such generosity. All he had done was fix a broken ship and help a stranded family. The answer came 2 weeks later when a new client arrived at the garage. She was human, which was unusual enough, but she was also clearly from one of the big corporations. Her clothes were expensive, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone used to getting what she wanted. "My name is Linda Hayes." Saad, showing Jake an official identification that marked her as a corporate investigator. "I work for the Galactic Trade Commission, and I need to ask you some questions about your recent business activities." Jake invited her into the office where Pete joined them. Linda spread out a collection of documents and data pads on the desk. "For the past month, there have been unusual financial flows connected to your repair business," she explained. "Large payments, expensive gifts, and business arrangements that do not match normal commercial patterns. Someone with considerable resources is taking a special interest in your work." Pete looked worried, but Jake was more curious than concerned. "Is that illegal? I mean, I have been doing good work and satisfied customers sometimes recommend you to their friends." Linda smiled, but it was not a happy expression. "Mr. Morrison, your recent clients include ships from 12 different alien species and 7 major corporate fleets. The payments you have received total more than most repair facilities make in a decade. This goes far beyond satisfied customers. Making recommendations." She pulled out a data pad that showed a complex chart of financial transactions. "Every payment to your business can be traced back through shell companies and subsidiaries to a single source. Someone is orchestrating this entire situation, and they have the resources of a major galactic corporation behind them. Jake studied the chart, but the corporate structure was too complex for him to follow. Do you know who it is? That is what I am here to find out, Linda replied. The payments are coming from accounts controlled by Zephyrian Stellar Dynamics. That may mean anything to you? Pete gasped and nearly dropped his coffee cup. Even Jake had heard of Zephyrian Stellar Dynamics. It was one of the largest corporations in known space, controlling shipping routes and manufacturing facilities across hundreds of worlds. They employed billions of beings and had resources that rivaled small governments. Why would a corporation like that care about a small repair garage? Jake asked. Linda leaned back in her chair and studied him carefully. That is exactly what I intend to find out. But first, I need you to tell me about every Zephyrian client you have worked for in the past month. Start with the emergency repair that seems to have triggered this whole situation. Jake told her about Kethra and her younglings, about the failing ship and the impossible repair that had somehow worked. Linda took notes and asked detailed questions about the family and their transport. When Jake mentioned the crystalline beacon that Kethra had given him, Linda's expression changed. You still have this device? She asked urgently. Jake nodded and pulled the beacon from his pocket. It had been warm and pulsing softly ever since Kethra gave it to him. Linda stared at it with growing amazement. Mr. Morrison, do you have any idea what you are holding? She asked quietly. Kethra said. It was a family beacon, a way to contact her if I ever needed help. Linda stood up and paced to the window of the office. Family beacons are not given to outsiders. They are sacred objects that connect members of Zephyrian family groups across vast distances. The fact that you have one means you have been adopted into a Zephyrian family structure. She turned back to Jake with a serious expression. But more importantly, family beacons are only carried by the most important members of Zephyrian society. Matriarchs, clan leaders, and corporate executives. Whoever gave you that beacon has significant power and influence in Zephyrian culture. Jake looked down at the warm crystal in his hands. She was just a mother traveling with her kids. Her ship broke down and I fixed it. Linda shook her head slowly. I think there is a lot more to this story than you realize. And I think it is time we found out exactly who Kethra really is. Linda Hayes spent the next 3 days digging deeper into the financial records connected to Jake's repair business. What she found made her more confused rather than less. The money trail led through dozens of shell companies and subsidiary corporations, all carefully designed to hide the true source of the payments. But every path eventually led back to the same place. Zephyrian Stellar Dynamics. Jake continued working on the steady stream of alien ships that arrived at the garage, but now he paid more attention to his clients. Many of them mentioned hearing about his work through family connections or business networks. When he asked how they had learned about his specific repair methods, they often gave vague answers about recommendations from trusted sources. Pete was getting more nervous about the situation each day. Jake, this is bigger than we can handle. Maybe we should close the garage for a while until we figure out what is going on. But Jake was not ready to stop working. The repairs were challenging and interesting, and he was learning more about alien technology every day. His simple human solutions were solving problems that had stumped teams of specialized engineers. He felt like he was finally doing something important. The breakthrough came when Linda managed to trace one of the shell companies back to its original registration. The corporate filing listed a single owner, a Zephyrian matriarch named Kethra Velthun. The name was long and formal, written in the style used by high-ranking members of Zephyrian society. Jake, I need you to look at this, Linda said, showing him the corporate documents. Does this name mean anything to you? Jake studied the formal Zephyrian script. The first part looks familiar. Kethra was the name of the matriarch I helped. But this is much longer and more complicated, Linda nodded grimly. That is because this is her full formal name, including her family titles and corporate positions. Jake, the woman you helped, is not just any Zephyrian matriarch. According to these records, she is the controlling owner of Zephyrian Stellar Dynamics. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He sat down heavily in his chair and stared at the documents. That cannot be right. She was just a mother traveling with her kids. Her ship broke down and she needed help. Her ship was worth more than most space stations, Linda said quietly, and now I understand why. It was not just a family transport. It was a mobile headquarters for one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Pete whistled softly and poured himself another cup of coffee. So Jake fixed the ship belonging to the CEO of the biggest corporation in known space. And she has been paying him back ever since. Linda pulled out more documents from her investigation. It goes deeper than that. I have been tracking the business patterns of Zephyrian stellar dynamics for the past month. They have been quietly hiring human mechanics and engineers across 3 sectors. They are paying premium rates for services that their own people could provide more efficiently. Jake thought about all the alien ships he had repaired recently. Most of the problems had been similar to what he had encountered on Kethra's transport. Biotechnology that was too complex for its own good, systems that worked perfectly until something went wrong and then failed catastrophically. Maybe they are having problems with their technology, Jake suggested. I have noticed that a lot of the Zephyrian ships I work on have similar issues. Their biosystems are incredibly advanced, but they do not handle failures very well. Linda looked at him with growing interest. What do you mean? Jake stood up and walked to his tool bench where he had been working on a diagnostic unit. Zephyrian technology is designed to be perfect. Every component is grown specifically for its purpose and integrated seamlessly with every other component. It works amazingly well under normal conditions. He picked up one of the adaptive tools that had been sent to him as a gift. But when something goes wrong, the entire system can fail because every part depends on every other part. Human technology is cruder, but it is also more flexible. When one part breaks, you can replace it with something else that does the same job. Linda made notes as Jake explained his observations. So you think Zephyrian stellar dynamics is having widespread technology failures? Not failures exactly, Jake said, but problems that their own engineers cannot solve because they are trained to work within the existing system. When I fix their ships, I ignore the existing system and create new solutions that work alongside it. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the garage's communication system. Someone was requesting permission to dock at their facility. Jake checked the incoming ship identification and felt his heart skip a beat. The vessel was registered as a corporate transport from Zephyrian Stellar Dynamics. Well, Linda said, looking at the communication display, it looks like we are about to get some answers. Jake activated the docking controls and watched through the viewport as an elegant Zephyrian ship approached their small garage. It was not as large as the transport he had repaired in the asteroid field, but it was clearly built for important passengers. The biometallic hull gleamed with health and the propulsion systems moved with perfect efficiency. The ship docked smoothly and Jake felt his nervousness growing. He had been working on Zephyrian vessels for weeks now, but this felt different. This was not an emergency repair or a routine maintenance job. This was something much more significant. The airlock opened and 3 figures emerged. 2 were Zephyrian guards in formal corporate uniforms, their carapaces polished to mirror brightness. But the 3rd figure made Jake's breath catch in his throat. Kethra looked different than she had in the cold corridors of her failing ship. She wore elaborate robes that marked her high status in Zephyrian society. Her natural bioluminescent patterns were enhanced with decorative elements that pulsed in complex rhythms. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to command, but when she saw Jake, her formal demeanor melted away and her patterns shifted to the warm colors he remembered from their first meeting. She approached him with her arms spread, in the Zephyrian gesture of greeting. "Jake Morrison," she said through her translation device, "it is good to see you again. I hope you have been well." Jake found his voice after a moment of stunned silence. "Kethra, I'm fine, thank you. How are your younglings?" Her bioluminescent patterns brightened with what Jake now recognized as parental pride. "They are thriving. They often speak of the small human who saved our family with his clever repairs." Linda stepped forward and introduced herself. Matriarch Kethra, I am Linda Hayes from the Galactic Trade Commission. I have been investigating the unusual business activity surrounding Mr. Morrison's repair services. Kethra turned her compound eyes toward Linda, and her patterns shifted to more formal colors. I see. And what have you discovered in your investigation? That you have been directing significant corporate resources towards supporting his business, Linda replied directly. I would like to understand why. Kethra was quiet for a long moment, her patterns cycling through colors that Jake could not interpret. Finally, she spoke in a tone that carried the authority of her position. Perhaps it is time for a more complete explanation. Jake Morrison, would you be willing to accompany me to my ship? There are things you should see and understand about what your repair work has accomplished. Jake looked at Linda, who nodded encouragingly. I think we need to know the whole story. Jake followed Kethra onto her ship, with Linda and Pete close behind. The interior was beautiful, with flowing organic architecture that seemed to pulse with life. But what caught Jake's attention were the displays covering the walls of the main cabin. The screens showed ship schematics, repair reports, and technical analyses from across Zephyrian space. Jake recognized some of the designs from ships he had worked on, but there were hundreds of others he had never seen. This is our crisis, Kethra explained, gesturing to the displays. For the past 5 years, Zephyrian Stellar Dynamics has been facing cascade failures across our entire fleet. Our biotechnology, which has served us well for centuries, has become too complex to maintain reliably. She activated a holographic display that showed the scope of the problem. Ships abandoned in deep space, stations evacuated due to system failures, entire colonies cut off from supply lines because their technology had broken down in ways that defied repair. Our engineers are the best in the galaxy, Kethra continued. But they have been trained to work within our existing technological paradigms. When those paradigms fail, they have no solutions to offer. Jake studied the holographic displays with growing understanding. But human engineers approach problems differently. Kethra's patterns brightened with approval. Exactly. When you repaired my ship, you showed me something that our civilization had forgotten. Sometimes the best solution is not the most elegant one. Sometimes you need to abandon perfection in favor of functionality. Linda was taking notes rapidly. So you have been hiring human mechanics to solve problems that your own people cannot handle. More than that, Kethra said. Jake's repair methods have inspired a complete rethinking of our technological approach. We are implementing his solutions across our entire corporate structure. Jake felt overwhelmed by the implications of what he was hearing. You mean that fixing your ship? That night has changed how your entire corporation operates? Jake stared at Kethra as her words sank in. The massive holographic displays around them showed the scope of the technological crisis facing Zephyrian stellar dynamics. Hundreds of ships, stations, and colonies were affected by cascade failures that their advanced biotechnology could not repair. And somehow, his simple human approach to fixing things had become the key to solving it all. What kind of proposition? Jake asked, though he suspected the answer would change his life forever. Kethra gestured to her guards, who activated additional displays showing corporate structure charts and financial projections. Jake Morrison, I want to offer you a full partnership in Zephyrian Stellar Dynamics, not as an employee or a contractor, but as a co-owner of the corporation. Linda gasped and nearly dropped her datapad. Even she had not expected something this significant. Pete just sat down heavily in one of the organic chairs, looking like he might faint. A partnership? Jake repeated slowly. But I'm just a mechanic. I fix broken ships with duct tape and spare parts. What could I possibly contribute to a corporation like yours? Kethra's bioluminescent patterns shifted to warm colors that Jake had learned meant deep sincerity. You could contribute exactly what we need most. A completely different way of thinking about technology and problem solving. She activated another holographic display that showed detailed analyses of Jake's repair methods. Our engineers have studied every repair you have made over the past month. They have identified 17 different techniques that violate our established engineering principles but produce superior results. Jake looked at the technical diagrams with amazement. Someone had documented his work in incredible detail, analyzing every improvised connection and jury-rigged solution. I just used whatever worked. Most of the time I was making it up as I went along. And that is precisely why it worked, Kethra explained. Our engineers are trained to follow established protocols and procedures. When those protocols fail, they have no alternatives. But you approach each problem as if it is completely new. One of the displays showed a comparison between traditional Zephyrian repairs and Jake's human methods. The biotechnology repairs were elegant and perfectly integrated, but they took weeks to complete and often failed again under stress. Jake's crude fixes were ugly and improvised, but they worked immediately and proved more reliable over time. We have been testing your repair methods across our entire fleet, Kethra continued. Ships that were scheduled for complete overhauls have been fixed with simple human engineering. Stations that were going to be abandoned are now fully operational. Your approach has saved us billions of credits and countless lives. Linda leaned forward with professional interest. What exactly are you proposing? A technology licensing agreement? A consulting contract? Kethra's patterns shifted to the formal colors of official business. I'm proposing that Jake become the Director of Human Engineering Solutions for Zephyrian Stellar Dynamics. He would have full authority to establish human engineering principles throughout our operations. His methods would become standard procedure across all our facilities. Jake felt overwhelmed by the scope of what was being offered. But I do not know anything about running a corporation. I barely understand how your technology works. How could I possibly take on that kind of responsibility? You would not be alone, Kethra assured him. I would remain as chief executive and handle the administrative aspects of the corporation. But you would have complete authority over all technical operations. Your engineering philosophy would guide how we approach every technological challenge. Pete finally found his voice. Jake, do you understand what she is offering you? This is one of the most powerful corporations in the galaxy. You would become one of the most influential beings in known space. Jake looked around at the displays showing the vast scope of Zephyrian stellar dynamics. Manufacturing facilities on hundreds of worlds, shipping routes that connected entire sectors, research stations exploring the frontiers of biotechnology. It was more responsibility than he had ever imagined. But then he thought about Kethra's younglings shivering in the cold corridors of their failing ship. He remembered the desperate gratitude in their mother's eyes when the heating systems came back online. All of this had started with a simple act of helping a family in trouble. What about Pete and Stellar Repairs? Jake asked. I cannot just abandon the people who gave me a chance when nobody else would. Kethra's patterns brightened with what Jake now recognized as approval. Your loyalty to your friends is one of the qualities that makes you perfect for this position. Pete Collins would become Director of Human Engineering Training. Stellar Repairs would remain operational as our primary research and development facility for human engineering methods. Pete's eyes widened with surprise and excitement. You mean our little garage would become part of your corporation? Not just part of it, Kethra explained. It would become the foundation of our new technological approach. Every engineer in our corporation would train at Stellar Repairs to learn human engineering principles. Your small garage would become the most important facility in our entire operation. Jake walked over to one of the viewports and looked out at Station Eco 7. The small human outpost floated among the asteroids like a tiny island of light in the darkness. Just a few weeks ago, he had been a nobody mechanic struggling to make enough credits to keep the garage running. Now he was being offered a chance to influence the technology of an entire galactic civilization. There's one condition, Jake said finally, turning back to face Kethra. If I accept this partnership, I want to establish human engineering training programs throughout your corporation. Not just for humans, but for every species you employ. Everyone should learn that sometimes the simple solution is the best solution. Kethra's Bioluminescent patterns exploded into brilliant colors of joy and agreement. That is exactly what I hoped you would say. Jake Morrison, you understand that technology should serve life, not the other way around. That is the wisdom we need. Linda was scribbling notes frantically, trying to document this historic moment. This is unprecedented. A human becoming a full partner in a major alien corporation. The political implications alone will be enormous. Jake thought about all the ships he had repaired, all the problems he had solved with simple human engineering. Maybe Linda was right about the political implications, but to him it felt like a natural extension of what he had always done. Help people who needed help and fix things that were broken. I accept your offer, Jake said formally. But I have one more request. I want to keep working on actual repairs. Not just managing other engineers, but getting my hands dirty with real problems. That is how I learn, and that is how I do my best work. Kethra moved closer and extended one of her delicate manipulator appendages in the human gesture of a handshake. Agreed. We will build workshops where you can continue to practice your craft while teaching others. The galaxy needs more beings who are willing to try new solutions to old problems. As Jake shook hands with the most powerful Zephyrian in known space, he thought about how strange his life had become. A month ago, he had been a simple mechanic fixing broken ships for barely enough credits to survive. Now he was entering a partnership that would affect the lives of billions of beings across hundreds of worlds, but in a way, nothing had really changed. He would still be fixing broken things and helping people who needed help. The scale was bigger, and the technology was more advanced, but the basic principle remained the same. Sometimes the most important job in the universe is knowing how to use duct tape and determination to make something work. The partnership between Jake Morrison and Kethra would become legendary in the years that followed. Human engineering principles spread throughout Zephyrian space and beyond, revolutionizing how advanced civilizations approach technological problems. The small garage on Station Eco 7 became a pilgrimage destination for engineers from across the galaxy, all coming to learn the simple truth that Jake had discovered. Sometimes, the best way to solve an impossible problem is to ignore the rules about what should be possible and just focus on what needs to be done. And sometimes the most advanced technology in the universe can be improved by a mechanic with a toolbox full of spare parts and the stubborn human refusal to give up on a problem that needs solving. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization was not advanced technology or military might, but something much more valuable. The human ability to look at any broken system and say, I bet I can fix that, with nothing but determination, creativity, and a willingness to try something that has never been done before.